So welcome to the next episode of Next Creators. Today we have Trevor from Croncat.
Hey, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Nice. So maybe we can start with your background first, and then we can dive deeper in Croncat and larger vision after this.
Sounds great. Let's do it.
All right. So where did you grow up?
I grew up in Oregon. It's a Pacific Northwest state. Lots of trees, lots of green. Kind of grew up on a farm, so have a lot less background in software, but it's a good experience.
When did you move to actually to Portland?
About 5 years ago. So I actually grew up in Oregon, moved down to California for college, and then moved back once wanted to actually settle down.
That's cool. And when did you get into software?
Yeah, so during college, I needed to make some money and make things happen. It was about like eighth grade or so. I started programming calculators, like the TIs and the HPs. In high school, I built some websites. So in college, I was like, hey, I could probably make some money making websites. So I started making websites for a graphic design agency, and they kind of started the ball rolling. Ended up leaving college early because that career was taking off, and that really moved me into e-commerce. I built some sites for that agency, and then there was an e-commerce position opening up, and I moved into e-commerce, and that really is where I spent majority of my time building. I worked in e-commerce for about 7 years, and during that time, built platforms from scratch, built extensions of platforms, both in startups and in corporate. And really, that's where I got a lot of experience in making things easy for users, making that payment flow easy, making large integrations happen for the data that backs products. So that's kind of the Web 2 world that I grew up in.
hmm And since you are working on payment flows, I assume it was kind of like more intuitive for you to understand value of crypto when you first interacted with it. So like when did you first get into crypto, and was it like right away kind of intuitively interesting?
Actually, it wasn't quite. I didn't get it right away. I was introduced to Bitcoin in 2013, and at that time, I was very interested in all things tech, but not necessarily in crypto. And so I kind of passed on that opportunity. And then I think it was mid 2016 when I realized that all this e-commerce stuff I had been doing actually should be done fundamentally differently. And that's when I started, really digging into what it meant to have a blockchain, and what kind of things were possible. And it really wasn't until I understood. It took me a good month of just like reading how Ethereum worked and how smart contracts could exist and be executed. And that's truly when like I had that aha moment, and I couldn't go back. It kind of unlocked some excitement, and I wanted to do as much as I could on top of Ethereum or anything blockchain related. So what I ended up doing was actually participating in a hackathon. It was a hackathon at Blockchain at Berkeley in 2017. And that was like the first time I really could see my knowledge executed in a crowd and see like, do I actually understand this thing, or you know, do I need to go learn a bunch more? And that competition was really fun. Ended up meeting a lot of great folks, and our project ended up winning. So that's kind of what really kicked off my career into blockchain, where I helped found another company called Amber Data IO, and that company is primarily focused on indexing blockchains and cryptocurrency market data, and it puts both those together so that there's a comprehensive API. So that's kind of been the main focus in my blockchain Web3 world. All along, though, I've been experimenting with different blockchains. So I've been experimenting with Cosmos and Polkadot and Ethereum, and then more recently, like the past year, really looking at Near and seeing what I can do. Yeah, I'll pause there because that's a lot.
That's cool. No, that's really really good, I think. So how did you also encounter Near? I would be curious, and what was the difference between like Cosmos Polkadot approach, Ethereum's approach that you saw, and here?
So actually, I'm a huge fan of the interconnectedness or the interblockchain world that is going to happen. And that's why I was driven to things like Near and Cosmos and Polkadot. They all have this vision of how can we have value that can transfer between chains? How can we have this self sovereignty idea that is backed by multiple consensus? And when I'm looking at Near, I see that there are bridges, and so that's one way that you can do that. Things like Cosmos, you can do that with their IBC and relayer type setups, and similar things happen on Polkadot. So what I did is experiment with, hey, I have these tiny, stupid project ideas. Let's see if they work on each of those networks. Um, so I started with Cosmos, and that was that was good. There was a lot of great documentation. The community is awesome, and the only issue for me is that um, I'm not that great at Golang. So when I was building the things, it was actually like really slow. So that plus combined with the other part of Cosmos, when I was experimenting, which at this point is a year and a half ago, and they've launched a lot more SDKs and stuff, you actually had to run your own infrastructure to have these examples or apps work. Um, so that kind of slowed me down. I tried a couple things on Polkadot. Their SDKs and stuff were not very good at the time, and they were heavily focused on their validator community. So that leads me to Near. For a while, I actually started a meetup and had some people coming, and there's this guy that came to my blockchain meetup and was telling me all about Near and how he was going to help build Near, and I thought that was really cool. So I wanted to dive deep into that, and ended up, reading through all the documentation, doing a few tests with the network, and kind of fell in love with both the community and the way that you can do things like access keys and the different like code base and stuff. A huge win for me on Near was I could write a contract in Rust that could compile down and run on the chain. But then also, just looking at the landscape of blockchains, Rust and WebAssembly and some of these other things are kind of becoming the standard that will be maybe ubiquitous in the future. So if I write something on Near, it could potentially run on multiple chains, maybe with a few tweaks. It could also, you know, it's a really nice platform to start adoption on Near because there's good UX, there's ease of onboarding. Um, those could also be using the cross chain things that we mentioned, and that's a really good strategy for growth.
What was on the other side the most challenging part about building on Near, if anything?
It's kind of the blessing and curse. Those access keys really, it took me a long time to get it. Specifically because I had this picture in my mind about what I thought they were, and then it became apparent what they actually were. So the thing that I love most about the access keys is the fact that I can prepay a way for users to use my contract, given some allowance. So that kind of eases the burden of them figuring out how do I get enough Near to pay a transaction fee, and then I can do X, Y, and Z. I should be able to help them, or maybe that's part of my business model. I can treat Near more like a database, and it's actually just a consensus backed value store, and the user doesn't necessarily need to be blockchain savvy. They can actually just know that their collateral, their data, is something that they own and that they can transact and move, but it's not something they need to go research a huge white paper before interacting.
And how did you pursue your own project in space? How did you also go about kind of like picking the idea?
I've had a bunch of ideas just kind of through the years. So there's this concept that I did in 2017, which was basically taking NFTs and making a Tamagotchi, and that was a really good project. But it had a huge downfall, which is blockchain does not have good viral loops. So if you're trying, a Tamagotchi is time based. If you're trying to get people to come back and feed your pet or do the next action, you need some way of alerting that user and having them come back to the app. And then secondly, you actually need a way that you can close out a transaction if no action happens from the user. So you don't want to have to, wait for the user to kind of progress the app. You want to have the app have enough logic that it can maintain itself. And so that's kind of where I've been focusing the past year. Is I want to build something that can allow any app on chain to maintain an ongoing cadence with, say, tasks. And so that's how I kind of came up with the idea of Croncat. And then secondly, how can I have my applications continue those viral loops? How can I get those users back into the app? So that's when I have been building an app called Pingbox, which is another way that you can alert your apps.
Interesting. I see. And so that's were you also kind of working on cron jobs before as well? That was like part of your kind of workflow in Web2 space, or did you kind of like more recently discover it and realize that this might be part of the solution that you're looking for?
Not really. I've used cron jobs just on servers before, just for like really tiny stuff, but hadn't really considered that that would be something I wanted to build. But I also saw when I first researched what was available and found that there wasn't really a cron setup on Near. There was actually an early project on Ethereum called Ethereum Time Machine, I believe, or Time Network, and it did a very similar thing where you could schedule out transactions, and then a network of people were running this service that would actually like pay for the transaction, and you would have to allocate some funds, and then they would pay for that transaction to happen in the future. And somewhere along the line, that project died, but the ideas were super needed, and um, that's where I really realized what potential there was for people to close the loop on so many interactions.
Interesting. I see. And when did you start on this? How many months ago?
Yeah, Croncat started in August of last year, and the cool thing is, I kind of hacked on it, made sure it was good, like a proof of concept worked, and then I applied for a Near grant in December and was granted in February of last year. So since February, we've really been me and a couple other people have been working on this in our spare time to get it out the gate. It hasn't been fast by any means, but it's something that is so needed that we're just able to work on it any waking hour to make it happen. Because you can do incredible things. Something I was talking about yesterday with some folks that just launched an app called Pixel Pets, which is a pixel dApp on Near. If you're playing this game, you want to continue your users and or your usage, and they have a time lock mechanism which you can hatch an egg and discover. You can buy a pet, you can hatch it, and then you can use it. Well, that's all time based. So Croncat would be able to actually like schedule that out and hatch that for you. So all you're doing is actually having the fun part of playing the game rather than kind of maintaining this ongoing hatch cycle. There's so many other things, like we could go through a bunch of different use cases, which are all outlined on the Croncat website.
That's cool. What was the initial use case? How did you find the initial couple, and how do you approach it right now? How do you come up with? Do you come up with new ones, or is it coming from like research, conversations with people?
Yeah, mostly just the conversations with people. The main thing that I use it for is for a subscription payment. So basically, every business model from Web2 world is, hey, I want to pay $5 a month for some service, and it comes automatically out of my credit card or bank account or whatever. That really doesn't exist on blockchain. So the idea is just copying that same concept in a way that works in Web3. Now, the mechanism is slightly different. So Croncat actually manages an escrow contract, where the user and the business can both agree that this is a subscription that you want to have happen, but at any time the user could pull their funds back out and cancel the subscription. So that way you kind of maintain this ownership that is fair for both participants.
That's cool. I see. And so that's like one of the main use cases right now, but there are like literally dozens of others, right?
Yeah, I mean, subscriptions is awesome. We can think about things like closing auctions. So all those NFT marketplaces, you can have those closed instead of users doing the finalizing. You can do things like rebasing tokens, which are really cool because that's a way to have a stable token without having to be backed by some collateral or arbitrage. And um, you can have voting and governance close out at the end of that voting period. There's a lot of other cool stuff I could go through, but just keep it short.
What was the most challenging piece about building Croncat so far?
There were two challenges actually. The first one being, how do we make an efficient queue run on chain? Because if you think about it, a task in a cron job is just part of a queue, and it's going to happen at some point. So what if you have somebody schedule 1,000 tasks? How do you make an efficient queue that's stored on chain? And when I talk about efficiency, what you're paying for on Near is you're paying for storage in some contract. So you want to make something that's as minimal as possible on chain, but still that important data. So really went through, I think, like 4 or 5 different iterations before we came up with our queue setup. Um, and we're still battle testing that today, so we may have more iterations in the future. The second huge one was actually, I guess you could call it a Sybil attack, maybe, but essentially with Croncat, there's a system of, you can become an agent, you can get paid to execute these tasks. So what happens if you have 100 agents and only 10 tasks? Then you would have the potential that there's a race where each agent wants to execute at the same time, and only 10 of them are going to get paid. And the rest of them are either going to, miss this opportunity, or they're going to get, they're going to have to pay a fee that essentially means they're losing money rather than making money. So this problem was a little bit difficult. And what we ended up doing was creating a threshold. So you could only register to be an agent as long as there was enough tasks for you to do. And there's a couple caveats to that, but that's just basically the concept. Is we can't be like 100% open, like everybody can run an agent. We actually have to make sure that there's enough work for you to do. So the idea is that the tasks and the agents will scale together. Or maybe in the future, there's a ton of tasks and the agents have to figure out how they can make themselves more efficient. That would be an awesome thing, because then they'd be getting paid a lot. So that's the last challenge. That's actually what held us back from going to mainnet a long time ago, was making sure that there was a good setup for the agents, a good setup for our queue, and then lastly, easy SDKs for apps to integrate Croncat. And I'm happy to say that not today, but in the next coming days, we're going to have something that's a no code solution for anybody to do a scheduled task. So you could say like, hey, weekly withdraw X amount of money to somewhere else, or maybe you're into yield farming, every X amount of time, farm, withdraw, and then reinvest. I have a friend that we're going to set up a easy Croncat task to do dollar cost averaging on chain, which will be really cool.
Yeah, that's amazing. And so far, have you found majority of the projects that you're working with kind of through outbound? You reaching into them, or you're already finding that people kind of like finding Croncat online and kind of writing you about it?
It's a little of both. It's still early days. We had some announcements about a month ago, and that's really propelled a lot of the inbound. Before that, it was all outbound, and we're still doing a lot of outbound. We're still trying to help educate what this thing is that we're doing and how powerful it is. And it's actually, I think, one of the first business models that is not reliant on a lot of upfront cost. The entire business model of Croncat revolves around making the interest So the setup is that Croncat is owned by a DAO that is governed by its community. The community needs some funds to continue development and all that stuff that that we do, marketing and whatnot. So since these are tasks, and the tasks you could do on your own, you could create your own server configuration and execute yourself, or you can schedule with Croncat and prepay that set amount in of fees into Cron, and it will take a snapshot of what it's going to use immediately or upcoming in the future and stake the upcoming amount. That interest that is earned from that stake is then sent back to the treasury of the DAO, so the DAO can actually continue doing what it's doing. And that means that our fees and everything are so minimal that it really isn't going to affect people running. Like, the fees are actually just a very tiny amount going directly to the agent. Cron has nothing to do with that fee structure. So I think that's pretty powerful.
Maybe since you mentioned also on DAOs, you can mention a bit about like how was it navigating just like DAO, how to get started on this, how it can be like really powerful for the project, because I feel like it's such a like new topic for people. Like in your ecosystem, on one hand, we have like 200 or so DAOs on the community side, and our projects are sort of starting to have DAOs. It's very early though, but it's like really powerful as well, right?
Yeah, it's super powerful. I've actually used DAOs on Ethereum for the past few years, and they were all pretty lightweight. It was mostly just like, hey, we have this idea, yes or no. There was a framework called Aragon, and we used that actually for a previous project I tried to get off the ground, but there wasn't a lot of community interest, so we paused it. But basically, Aragon had a bunch of cool things like token distribution and treasury and bounties and all these things. The problem was it was it was really slow and expensive. I think I paid like $50 or $70 to deploy this DAO, like USD at the time, and that was a lot. I think today it's probably 1,000 something. So who knows? But now looking at Sputnik DAO and some of the other things that are coming up with near DAOs, for one thing, it's super cheap, which is great, and then it's really flexible. So I did a few tests just to see what I could do. But there's already a way that you can do payouts, bounties, token distribution, and then there's this crazy thing called custom function, which means that my DAO can actually have a proposal to start a Croncat task. It has a way that you can do literally anything on chain through a proposal, which is just mind blowing. That's really what got me most excited about running Croncat as a DAO. And then the second thing is, for those that are new to DAOs are a way that a community can come together and take action. So there's many ways that can happen. You can distribute tokens, and based on token amounts, you can vote. Um, but that can mess up a community. If your community does something with liquidity or collateral, then there's a general assumption that the collateral will affect your judgments. So for Croncat, I wanted to kind of step away from that idea and create a community that revolved around specific roles about what people are responsible for. So in Croncat, there is no token on this in this DAO. It is solely made to keep the balance of the applications and the agents and the developers aligned with how this entity Cron is going to run and continue running in the future. And so we do that by having different roles that are responsible for different aspects of the DAO. They're able to vote in different ways, they're able to propose in different ways. But the whole idea is to have this balance of, here's what we want to do, here's what we think we should do, and here's the community voice about the action, the outcome of that proposal. And I think there will be a lot more DAOs that happen that way. Um, it really it really empowers the voice over value.
Mm-hmm. And since you also mentioned about community and importance, like in terms of like being deliberate about what kind of community you want to build and how to grow it. I'm also seeing that kind of building different projects in crypto is very different. It is kind of bottoms up and with the community and in very like incremental fashion. So how do you approach this? Because it's like very different, I would say, from like how it was done before, right?
Yeah, it's pretty difficult actually. The main thing is, coordination. How are you getting everybody to speak the same chat messenger? how are you getting how are you getting everybody to communicate and how so what we're attempting to do is unite in the same channels and give the community the freedom to do what they need to do. Like we have a team called the Croncat Commanders. Their responsibility is to help grow, do either through helping onboard applications or through social media or other outlets. And their tasks are goal based, and they have the freedom to achieve those goals how they need to. From the standpoint of development, there is a roadmap, but there's not something like a daily Scrum meeting or something. It's actually just, hey, are you passionate about making this happen? Cool, we've got some DAO funds to make that go forward. Let's make this happen as a community. So it's a little bit of a learning curve. Anyone that's done freelancing, it works out really well because you're familiar with how things happen. If you're new to that concept, there's a little bit of an onboarding to get your head around how that works.
Mm-hmm. Now, how do you think also about the direction of Croncat going forward? What's your kind of bigger vision?
Yeah, great question. So Croncat, I believe, is a piece of a larger infrastructure that is needed. So let me outline something that I've been kind of laying the groundwork for. I'm going to paint a picture here of that Gotchi app again. I'm going to go back to that. So Gotchi was an app that required both time-based and notification abilities. And so Cron was a way to do the time-based. And then I mentioned Pingbox. It was a way to do notifications. There's many other pieces there. And if you think about the abstract version of that, there's a way that every dApp needs those same capabilities. So what if there's an SDK or a service or both that has all those core components already built, and the dApp can focus on their business models and their app experience. So something like Gotchi effectively could plug in cron tasks or notifications or on-chain indexing or X, Y, and Z. So this bigger vision that I'm working towards is actually I'm coining the term layer Y, so the utility layer. Think of like telecom. I know that's a terrible analogy here, but there's an infrastructure that delivers messages between people. Layer Y would be the layer that sits above blockchain and below applications. So any dApp could just accelerate their time to market. They could focus on the usability and experience that they want. And then there's this sustainable layer that supports that for them. And I'm not talking about, I'm building another like layer two blockchain that does things. There's The blockchain is really good at being the blockchain. It's really good at being a store and transfer payment structure. But there's all these Web 2 missing pieces. Like you can think about Stripe and Twilio and MailChimp and like all of these other Web 2 huge businesses that we're used to. All of those need to exist on Web 3, and they can be built in a sustainable, decentralized manner. So for layer Y, my goal is to have something similar to Croncat agents. The agent is the one that runs the Croncat task. A like packaged little utility that anybody can run and earn some fees for providing these decentralized services. And then apps can subscribe through a DAO subscription or something cool. They can pay for the operations that they need to, and that's going to deliver excellent experience for their users. It'll scale with their growth, and it'll match all the features that they're looking for, so they don't have to build all that same stuff, app after app. So this is kind of coming to this is addressing the need that I think is going to happen, which is fully autonomous on-chain businesses where a DAO can fully own and maintain itself, and the community and the services that are wrapped around it are fully autonomous. Like it can say, okay, set a cron task to pay notifications monthly, and it delivers everything. Or in 3 months, I want to have an airdrop to all my loyal community members, or any number of things. It's basically I want to have other folks get around this model where you can really just make these entities fully owned and sustained on chain, and they're supported by these decentralized services.
And I know it's probably hard to predict, but when do you think we're going to get to this future of fully autonomous businesses on chain?
I can tell you right now, we're probably weeks away from our first like fully autonomous idea. The pieces are in testing. I think we're going to see it in about a year. So there's a couple of big catalysts that I think need to happen. First, there needs to be enough applications that want this to happen, and that's something that there's a lot of interest in, but it's really hard to say if they are happy to rely on something different like that. A lot of the apps right now are running their own indexing, they're running their own notification service, all that kind of stuff. So I want to make sure that this concept that I'm going for actually has merit. And then the second catalyst is actually kind of a bigger market hindrance, I think, which is if there's not enough collateral, that chain probably will be stagnant. And what I mean by that is, you have Ethereum. Ethereum has so much collateral and value that's already there, but it's kind of slow. And so people are trying to figure out ways of making it different and moving outwards. If the future that I see happens where there's inter-blockchain connectivity, you're going to have a competitive market happen where collateral is going to move out to these other chains. Well, if that collateral reaches enough into those autonomous businesses, then they can thrive. So I'm really waiting to see, how much collateral is moving between those chains, and then how can layer Y support those applications and actually, you know, give them the tools they need to build a sustainable business model, and then elevate them into that fully autonomous model that I'm portraying here.
And I also like what makes me think is like there is a bit of a like educational gap, just generally speaking, what you know, what I know, other people in the space know, kind of like is generally not as available in terms of like, well, how do you run this fully autonomous on-chain business, right? How do you think we can bridge the gap towards like many more people actually learning this?
Yeah. First and foremost, by dog fooding, we're going to run our DAO entirely autonomously through Cron and Pingbox, and we're hoping to expand that through all the other core services that we're talking about. Secondly, um, small announcement: I'll be at the NearCon in Lisbon, and the whole point of that talk is to deliver this concept of autonomous businesses and how that works, how that looks like for just everyday people and people that are building. Um, I believe that there's going to be an SDK that we're going to build that will support that concept. And then, secondly, I want to get the word out there. So we're going to do a bunch of, well, probably a lot of talks and that kind of thing, all the while showcasing how we're doing it with Croncat DAO and future other tiny businesses.
Yeah, that's really cool. And you also mentioned, I think earlier, before we started recording, the user friendliness aspect or user experience aspect of it. So how is that playing into this bigger picture of Cron?
Yeah, totally. So I think one of the main pain points that Cron solves is making sure that a user comes back to that application to finalize something. And what's really cool is you can schedule that out. So if you're maybe auctioning an item or you're bidding and hoping to win some auction, that it can actually act on behalf of you. So that really helps the user experience. Um, but that only addresses like 1/4 of the whole loop of how apps continuously communicate and interact with the users. So that's where layer Y is addressing every pain point along the way, where whether it's onboarding and you're trying to just kind of set up communications where with Pingbox, the user is in control with the channels that they receive notifications on, so email, SMS, Slack, Discord, whatever. That's reaching back out to where they are currently at, and then in the future they'll have like a on-chain inbox and that kind of thing. Then Cron is kind of progressing the on-chain aspects. There's going to be a few other pieces of this puzzle that help them kind of autonomously manage their data on chain, whether it's I want to set up dollar cost averaging, or I want to do um, a release of my NFT weekly, or that kind of thing. So it's really, if we're talking about user experience, I am hoping to find ways to help the dApps implement their experience better. They're going to be the ones ultimately in control of the experience. So what pain points can I solve that help them meet the needs of their users?
Hmm. Yep. And how do you also, as you run now the business, how do you think about like what kind of information to learn, what information to consume on a daily basis to be able to know kind of like where to go next?
Whew, there's a lot. There's a mountain of information. You know what? I read a lot of news and articles and even white papers sometimes, but the biggest thing that has helped me learn the most is actually going through tutorials, or little example builds, or even just like trying out a decentralized app. The cool thing is when you go through those tiny little experiences, it kind of makes you realize how things are working, or the pain and friction that is still there, and it really causes you to think more of how is this working, rather than you could research all day long about something, but until you actually use it, you don't get it. So I'll give you an example. There's a really fun game on Near called Berry Club. I passively looked at it and I was like, wow, that's a really cool art project. But guess what? The second that I actually participated and drew a little pixel, that's when I understood the power that was actually happening with that app. And that's happened so many times with the different apps on Near. So I think if there's anything you can take away from this talk today, it's just go try a dApp. If you want to really understand what Near is about, or even blockchain, just go try an app.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. Um, Last question I have for our audience: where should they find more information if they want to use Cron in their business?
Awesome. Right now, the website is cron.cat, Cron.cat. You can find us on Twitter at Croncats with an S. And we've got a Discord. We've got a bunch of community stuff. Would love to have any feedback that you have. If you come across something and you want to know how it works, we're happy to help. So, yeah, give us a shout out.
That's cool. Well, thank you for coming today, Trevor. That was really insightful.
It's a blast. Thank you so much.